The rotor blades sliced through the pre-dawn chill like surgical steel, each beat echoing against the concrete hangar walls. In the pilot's compartment, mechanics and pilots alike froze when they saw her slender frame draped and grease-stained. Flight cuffs, eyes steady on the controls as if fate itself hung on her next move. Her gloved hand on the throttle was the only thing preventing disaster. She'd polished that throttle hundreds of times, yet never in her wildest training drills had she imagined blood would stain the runway within the hour. Still, she leaned closer, heart calm as a metronome, and nudged the lever forward. Drop a "if you've ever been underestimated" every morning at 05:00 sharp. Lieutenant Kara Hayes walked the silent corridors of Echo Wing's maintenance bay. She inhaled the familiar tang of hydraulic fluid and overheard the gruff voices of technicians trading bets on which fuselage would crack under tonight's simulated tornado winds. Mostly male, hardened by years of standard protocol and macho bravado, they whispered about the mechanic who'd never flown more than ground tests. Yet to Kara, the hum of diagnostic scanners and the whisper-soft hum of servos felt like music. She could read like a pro. Her father, a decorated test pilot, had taught her to listen for the subtlest engine murmur. Her mother, an elite combat medic, had trained her fingers to patch wounds faster than most could load a magazine. But here, in the hushed aroma of oil and ozone, she was just Technician Hayes, head down, blending into the shadows. Tap, if you believe in second chances. It began with the alarm. A shrill klaxon split the air as red lights flickered. Mission alert. The disaster response squadron's compound exploded into coordinated chaos. Pilots sprinted toward helicopters, medics scrambled for stretchers, and engineers barked instructions. Kara's pulse ticked up, but her breathing stayed measured. She strode to the cockpit of the damaged Valkyrie craft, helmet swinging from her belt. "Hayes," barked Captain Rourke, veteran of 3 deployments. "This is a pilot's seat, not a toolbox." She met his glare without flinching. "These avionics are off by .08 within spec, but under these conditions that drift could be fatal." He froze. The thrumming blades outside seemed to pause. "I'll run the corrections." As she powered the systems, the compound commander's voice boomed. "Seismic tremors at the canyon's lip. Civilians trapped. Aftershock imminent. We need evac now." The Valkyrie wasn't meant for rescues. It was a prototype heavy lift transport. No pilot had ever taken it beyond test wire boundaries. The manual warned against sudden weight shifts. But the drop zone was 5 miles away, and every minute cost lives. Kara keyed her headset. "I can handle it. Adjust flight controls to neutral stability. I'll compensate." "You're not cleared," Rourke shot back. She tapped screens, recalculated thrust curves, and overrode the lockout. "If you want the survivors off that cliff, I'm your mechanic and your pilot." Silence weighed heavier than any storm. She strapped in, helmet locking with a metallic click. Sweat dampened her brow, but her gaze stayed fixed on the HUD. In her mind, her mother's voice whispered triage protocols. Her father's lessons guided her hands around the controls. "Underestimate me," she thought, "and live with the consequences." Outside, the canyon's rim glowed with lanterns' frantic, flickering hope. The tremors had widened cracks that snaked toward a precarious overhang. One slip, and the entire ledge would collapse. Kara breathed in, then out, and lifted. The Valkyrie shuddered, bucking under its own weight. Kara's fingers danced across the throttle quadrant, each millimeter applied with a surgeon's precision. She leaned into the stick, coaxing the beast upward. Smoke from a previous drill filled the air, visibility dropping. The targeting computer flickered, but she switched to manual, guided by feel. She hovered 40 feet above the broken ground. Below, figures waved soaked tarps, desperately seeking shelter under the craft's downdraft. She angled the nose up, easing descent. The cargo ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss. No pilot handbook covered this. Just raw calculation and trust in muscle memory. Momentarily, a tremor rattled the valley. The helicopter rocked violently. Cables groaned. Passengers tumbled toward the ramp's edge. Kara's heart hammered, but she remained rock steady. With a quick tap, she deployed secondary landing skids and angled blast vanes to counterflow. One by one, survivors stumbled up the ramp, elderly, wounded, children blinking at the sudden brightness. A boy reached for Kara's hand. She wrapped a gloved finger against his forehead, recalling her mother's casualty check drills. He looked at her, awe and trust shining in his eyes. Then came the collapse, a roar as Earth split further, and the ground below the hover point cracked open like a wound. Kara throttled up, hauling the Valkyrie back level. Darkness and dust swirled. The canyon swallowed the ledge whole. She banked sharply, climbing toward the compound. Mechanics and pilots spilled onto the tarmac, faces pale, mouths agape. Captain Rourke stood below, helmet off, jaw slack. She killed the engines and stepped out into the dawn's crimson glow. Silence reigned until Rourke's voice cut through. What? How? Kara pulled off her gloves, wiping grease streaks across her flight suit. Just did my job, he swallowed. You just flew one of the deadliest missions in Dr. S history. Her eyes flicked to the cratered canyon. Lives saved, history written. Yet she only felt the whisper of something bigger, an unsettling question pulling at her core. What will they call me now? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The burning rotor blades spat embers into the pre-dawn haze, trailing sparks like fallen stars across the sky. Below, the cratered canyon lay silent in this, carved by catastrophe and human error. Lieutenant Kara Hayes leaned forward in the co-pilot seat of the Valkyrie, eyes narrowing as the HUD flickered warnings. Her gloved hand hovered above the ejection toggle, fingers aching for action she wasn't yet cleared to take. Drop a. If you've ever teetered on the brink of disaster, only 48 hours ago, Kara had been running diagnostics on the Valkyrie's left flank tension springs, hydraulic actuators, the new composite chassis patch. Captain Rourke had dismissed her concerns. Within tolerance, he'd grunted, eyeballing her printout. But Kara's father had taught her that tolerances in theory often spelled death in practice. She tucked the memory away as she secured the cargo bay struts, humming her mother's lullaby to steady her nerves. Tap. If you believe precision is a superpower, the compound's emergency broadcast had shattered the routine. Accelerated seismic activity at Canyon Ridge. Primary evac routes compromised. Secondary landing protocol in effect. Kara felt the pit in her stomach tighten. Secondary protocol meant improvisation. She glanced at the co-pilot's console stabilizer override armed. Only a pilot should flick that switch. Yet no pilot in their right mind would have volunteered for this dive into the unknown. She flicked it anyway. Outside, the wind gusted through the shattered canyon mouth, carrying dust that clawed at the cockpit glass. Kara adjusted the Valkyrie's attitude, banking the aircraft into the swirling vortex. On the approach vector, she spotted them, 3 stranded. Responders clinging to a fractured ledge, equipment cases lined like tombstones. Time flared in her mind. 6 minutes before the ledge collapsed. 4 before aftershocks rattled free debris. 2.5 before the next tremor estimated. She updated the flight plan on the fly. The heads-up display overlaid a grid of possible descent paths. Most were blocked by wind shear. One narrow corridor remained just wide enough for the Valkyrie's wingspan. Official doctrine forbade such maneuvers. But Kara visualized the path as if tracing the designs her father had taught her, each angle etched into muscle memory. Her voice crackled over the comm. Rourke, adjust angle of attack to -3.2. Hold vector Bravo, Silence then. You serious? Kara let a half-smile curve her lips. I've run the numbers. She dropped altitude, compensating for the rotor wash. The canyon walls closed in, echoing the pulse of her heartbeat. Dust devils writhed below, threatening to obscure her sight. Kara toggled the variable intensity floodlights white-hot, beams carving a path through the brown haze. The responders raised reflective panels to catch her light. One waved a red flare. She banked left, then right, tracing the narrow conduit. The Valkyrie groaned out, she whispered under her breath. Come on, baby. Engines whined as she feathered the collective. The skids scraped the jagged outcrop. A cascade of pebbles rattled down the rock face. Kara held position by millimeters, the craft shuddering in protest. She popped open the cargo bay hatch below. The responders scrambled aboard, hauling stretchers and data cores. Kara saw the dread in their eyes, a mix of fatigue and gratitude. She adjusted the gravity compensators, ensuring no sudden shifts would tip the load. The last responder clambered in as the ledge, cracked hairline fissures racing toward collapse. Drop a, if life is about perfect timing. Kara slammed the hatch closed, sealing the compartment. She throttled up, every gauge screaming. The canyon walls blurred as she punched upward, dodging falling boulders. The tail rotor clipped, a chunk of stone metal screeched. But the Valkyrie held. Mom's voice echoed in her mind. Always leave room for error margins. She banked them toward open sky. Once clear of the canyon's mouth, Kara leveled out, chest heaving. The compound came into view, lights carving the darkness like guiding beacons. She engaged auto-stabilization, letting the systems take over while she ran final checks. Captain Rourke's voice buzzed. That was unauthorized and insane. Kara's lips twitched. And it saved lives. He exhaled slowly. You're a miracle worker. She turned from the viewport. Just a mechanic. In the unloading bay, medics rushed forward, hauling stretchers away. Kara unstrapped herself and stepped onto the tarmac. The survivor's data core thumped in her flight bag, a testament to those she couldn't save. She tucked her chin. Reporter's drone buzzed overhead. Autofocus trained on her grease-streaked face. Flashing lights pierced the night. Kara's heart thudded. Fame was a dangerous payload. She straightened her shoulders, ready to face the crowd. The compound commander appeared, his uniform crisp. He hesitated, then saluted. Lieutenant Hayes, you exceeded protocol and expectations. You're cleared for pilot's commission. Gasps rippled through the bystanders. Kara's mind spun. Commission meant textbooks, flight school, bureaucracy. Just call me Technician Hayes, she murmured. Tap, if you think heroes come in unexpected forms. She exhaled as the compound lights dimmed behind her. The mission was over, but the questions had only begun. Who was this woman who bent the rules and fate to her will? And what storm might she weather next? Stay tuned. Our next chapter follows Kara into the crucible of command. Tomorrow, discover the legacy she claim and the rivals she confront. The compound slept fitfully, its floodlights casting long shadows across the tarmac where the Valkyrie had returned. Kara Hayes lingered by the aircraft long after the medics, mechanics, and officers had retreated to their bunks. The faint scent of scorched oil clung to her flight suit. She leaned her shoulder against the battered hull, eyes tracing the fresh gash along the tail rotor casing. It would hold if they trusted her to fix it. Drop a if you've ever stood alone when everyone else went home. Inside the maintenance hangar, the air was thick with the tang of lubricants and ozone. Kara stalked the aisles between workbenches, fingers brushing over torque wrenches and hydraulic lines like a surgeon choosing scalpels. She could feel the eyes on her, the crew she'd just saved peeking from behind fuselages and tool lockers. Respect mingled with suspicion. A mechanic who flew. It didn't fit their neat hierarchy. She pulled a fresh torque seal from the rack, snapped it open, and got to work on the rotor mount herself. Each bolt she tightened was a message. I know what I'm doing. I've always known. Tap, if you've ever had to prove yourself twice. Hours blurred. Somewhere around 0300, Kara's palms were black with composite dust. Her head dipped toward the schematic on the holoscreen, eyes gritty but wide awake. She let the autopilot of her mind take over, drifting to memories she'd buried deep. Her father's grin the first time she balanced an entire rotor blade on her own. Her mother's gentle reprimand when she stitched a gash in her own arm after a hangar accident. Those lessons felt like ghost hands guiding her now. What did they call you, Dad? She whispered to the empty bay. What will they call me? The clang of boots jolted her back. Captain Rourke stood by the Valkyrie's nose, helmet tucked under his arm, eyes scanning her work. He didn't speak until she met his gaze. You're wasting your skills here, Hayes. She shrugged, fingers tightening one last bolt. Someone's gotta keep this bird flying. He stepped closer, dropping his voice. Command wants you up for pilot training, fast-tracked. You'll outrank half the squad. Think they'll take orders from you after this? Kara wiped sweat from her brow. I don't care if they do. Rourke's laugh was low and humorless. You will when you're in the field, and every decision means life or death. A rumble underfoot shivered through the concrete floor, an aftershock, gentle but ominous. Kara's eyes flicked to the seismic readout by the hangar door. Numbers spiked and settled. She could read the pattern. The Earth wasn't done yet. She leaned her wrench on the workbench. They don't have to like me. They just have to survive. Rourke nodded, almost respectful. Then his gaze darkened. Watch. You're 6, Hayes. You make people nervous when you break their idea of you. She didn't answer. Instead, she cracked open the maintenance hatch again, double-checking the stabilizer lines she'd just assured. The rumble of the ground was fading now, but Kara's gut told her another rupture was brewing, one deeper than any fault line. She turned back to the empty bay, shoulders squared against the ghosts that still lingered. Drop a, if you've ever felt the earth move under your feet, literally or not. By sunrise, the compound was buzzing. New orders pinned to the ops board. A reconnaissance flight to assess potential landslide zones. Not a job for rookies. Not officially Kara's job at all. She approached the flight roster. Pilots huddled in clusters, whispering. When she stepped up, they parted just enough to let her see her name next to Rourke's as co-pilot. A snort behind her. Sergeant Lindell, the compound's loudest skeptic, leaned against the doorframe. Look at that. Our wrench monkey's a flyer now. Kara didn't rise to the bait. Better hope you're never on my bird when it breaks apart. His smirk faltered. In the ready room, Kara laid out the flight plan on the flickering table display. Rourke watched her run through the projected tremor zones and fallback landing sites. He said nothing, just drummed his fingers on his helmet. You trust me? She asked, voice low. He snorted. I trust you not to let your ego get us killed. Fair enough. The Valkyrie's turbines roared to life, the sun catching on the fresh welds along the tail rotor. Kara felt the vibration run through her boots as she climbed into the cockpit. Her pulse slowed as her hands closed over the throttle. Here, everything made sense. Numbers, angles, torque, lift. She glanced at Rourke, strapped in beside her. He gave her a tight nod. Let's find out if this bird still loves you, he muttered. Kara let a rare grin slip. She better. They lifted off just as the compound's gates swung open for a ground convoy. Dust billowed around the perimeter. Kara banked left, engines protesting at first, then settling into a smooth hum. Below, the fracture lines in the terrain looked like veins of some sleeping giant, waiting to crack wide open. They flew low, scanning with the belly sensors. The radio buzzed with chatter from ground teams. Kara tuned it out, focusing on the Valkyrie's whisper, the way the air slipped past the rotors, the subtle tremor in the stick. Tap, if you've ever trusted your gut when everyone else said Don't. Midway through the sweep, Rourke tapped the altitude display. We're losing lift on the starboard side. Kara felt it before she saw it. A tiny yaw. A hiccup in the thrust line. She checked the readout pressure drop in the right lift fan. Secondary stabilizer arm, she muttered. It's the weld. Rourke's knuckles whitened on the dash. Options? Kara's mind spun. We reroute airflow, dampen lift on port side too. Balance, but we'll drift. Into the canyon? She flipped switches, her father's voice echoing in her mind. Every machine has a personality. Know it better than your own. I can hold her, Kara said. They dipped lower. The canyon loomed ahead, its edges jagged and unstable. Boulders the size of trucks balanced precariously along the ridges. Rourke's voice was tight. Your call, Hayes. She angled the nose into the crosswind, compensating with micro-adjustments. The Valkyrie groaned, but Kara felt the machine settle under her hands, an uneasy truce between steel, air, and willpower. They skimmed the canyon's lip. Sensors pinged with seismic data spikes, tremors, a new fracture line racing south. Heart hammered, but her face was calm. Rourke muttered, They're gonna rewrite the manual for you, you know that? She almost laughed. Then the ridge below them shifted. Earth peeled away, tumbling into the abyss with a roar that swallowed the cockpit's drone. Kara yanked the stick, throttling up. The right lift fan coughed, metal shearing inside the housing. The Valkyrie lurched, dropped, then caught lift again. For a breathless heartbeat, they were weightless. Rourke's voice was a whisper. Hold her, Kara. She grit her teeth, felt every bolt, every weld, every rivet straining. And she held. They cleared the canyon's edge, rotors screaming. Kara limped the Valkyrie back toward the compound, every gauge in the red. Below, the new fracture line glowed on the HUD, an ominous promise of the next disaster. When they touched down, the mechanics swarmed the aircraft. Kara sat in the cockpit, hands trembling for the first time. Outside, Rourke slid open the canopy. Still think you're just a mechanic? Kara met his eyes, her own dark and unflinching. Doesn't matter what I think. It's what they'll call me next that counts. Stay tuned. Tomorrow, you'll see what happens when the ground gives way again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The ground beneath Echo Wing's compound had always been unstable, a restless spine of earth that shifted without warning. Kara Hayes knew its moods better than most. She felt it now, in the tiny shudders that vibrated up her boots as she stood by the Valkyrie's battered fuselage. The fresh stress fractures along the lift fan housing glistened under the hangar's harsh lights, like old scars split open. Drop. If you've ever patched something you knew would break again. They'd grounded her, of course. Officially, she was to remain on maintenance duty until the investigation board convened. Unofficially, she heard the whispers in the break room, in the mess hall, outside the medic's tent. Some called her reckless, a wild card. Others, the ones who'd been pulled from the canyon by her hands, just called her necessary. She didn't care much for either name. She cared for the Valkyrie. She cared for the next tremor. And she cared for the next life she might have to save. Tap. If you believe you have to break the rules, sometimes. Her father's old flight jacket hung from her locker door, the sleeves frayed from years of wear. She found herself running her fingers over the faded insignia, more often lately, an old habit from nights before training drills or long maintenance shifts when she was the only one left in the hangar. It reminded her she came from people who bent the world to fit survival, not the other way around. A heavy bootstep snapped her from the trance. Sergeant Lindell leaned in her doorway, arms folded, the faint smell of chain oil clinging to him. You think they're gonna let you back in that seat? He sneered. They'll clip your wings for good. Nobody wants a mechanic playing pilot. Kara just shrugged. They didn't want a pilot playing mechanic either. Didn't stop my father, Lyndall scoffed. Yeah? And look how he ended up. Her eyes flashed, alive and respected. And somewhere you'll never touch. He backed off with a low chuckle, but his words lingered like acid. She checked the clock. 3:17. Outside, the wind rattled the bay doors. A storm was rolling in, rain to soften the ground, water to feed the fractures. She knew what that meant for the cliffs east of the canyon. She also knew the Valkyrie wouldn't be ready in time. She pulled up the maintenance log on her tablet. Warnings, incomplete work orders, parts on back order. Her fingers hovered over the override key. If she signed off the aircraft herself, she could be in the air before dawn. It wasn't the first time she'd considered breaking protocol. But this time, it felt like something else. Not rebellion, but necessity. Droppa, if you've ever acted when everyone else froze, she didn't get the chance. The compound sirens wailed a sharp, undulating cry that sliced through her thoughts. A fresh tremor rocked the floor, sending her tablet skittering off the workbench. She ran for the hangar doors, pushing through the stampede of mechanics and junior pilots scrambling for evacuation points. Outside, the east cliffs were already collapsing, massive plumes of earth tumbling like dark waterfalls into the canyon. Captain Rourke's voice boomed over the comms. Ground teams pinned near Sector 12. Heavy equipment can't reach them. We need eyes and lift now. Kara bolted for the flight line. There it was, Valkyrie's sister bird, the Icarus, fueled and idle. She slid past two stunned pilots, keys swinging from her belt. Haze! Rourke barked, catching up to her. You're grounded. She spun, eyes blazing. So ground me when they're safe, or you fly it. You think you can handle her? He didn't answer. He just tossed her the override card. The Icarus shuddered. To life under her hands, similar systems to the Valkyrie, but heavier, slower to respond. She coaxed the rotors up to speed, mind dancing through the numbers, the torque curves, the lift compensations she'd calculated in her sleep. Rourke climbed in beside her. No helmet this time, just raw faith and the tremble in his clenched jaw. They lifted off into driving rain, searchlights piercing the gloom. Below, the canyon's edge bled into itself, the fractures spreading like veins of molten glass. The cum crackled with the panicked voices of pinned ground teams. Kara flicked to a split-screen thermal overlay and LiDAR scan. Mudslides were sweeping entire outcrops into the abyss. There, 5 figures huddled under a collapsed steel beam. One was waving a chem stick, its ghostly green halo blinking. SOS. Rourke pointed. Too tight. You'll shred the lift fans. Kara banked the Icarus sideways, ignoring the redline alarms. The tail rotor clipped an old support pillar, sparks showering the darkness. But the bird held. She hovered 10 feet above the beam, eyes flicking to the sway readouts. The soil under the survivors was dissolving. Any second now, they'd drop. Rourke! Lower the winch. The cable swung like a silver pendulum through the storm. Rourke leaned out, guiding it with calm precision. One by one, the pin team hooked in, bodies battered, eyes wide with disbelief. Kara compensated with micro-tilts, each gust threatening to slap the Icarus into the canyon wall. The last survivor clung to the beam. A kid fresh out of training, barely older than Kara had been when she first crawled through an engine nacelle. With her father's voice in her ear, "Kid, you've got to let go." Rourke shouted through the downpour. The kid shook his head. Lips split, eyes round as saucers. Kara flicked on the external cum. Her voice cut through the static. "I'll hold you. You just have to trust me." He let go. The beam slid away into the mud with a sickening lurch. The winch cable jerked him skyward, swaying like a ragdoll. Kara throttled up, lifting them clear as the cliff face collapsed beneath them. They cleared the washout by inches, rain battering the canopy. Below, the earth swallowed the place where the team had stood. When they touched down back at the compound, the survivors stumbled out, faces pale, clothes caked with clay. One turned to her eyes wide, voice cracking. "Who are you?" Kara popped her harness, boots hitting the mud with a splatter. She didn't answer him, didn't have to. The look on Rourke's face said it all. He offered her a hand. She took it, grease under her nails, rain dripping from her hair. Somewhere, under the roar of the retreating storm, she heard her father's voice. "The world doesn't get to tell you who you are. Stay tuned." Tomorrow she learned what happens when the earth opens up and the old guard tries to shut her down for good. The Icarus sat on the tarmac like a wounded hawk, rotors caked in mud, tail stabilizer barely clinging to its mount. Kara Hayes paced under the buzzing floodlights, boots squelching through the rain-soaked gravel. She felt every vibration underfoot. The compound's generators cycling up, the faint rumble of aftershocks deep beneath the concrete. Somewhere under all that noise was the drumbeat she'd learned to trust her gut, telling her this was far from over. Drop a, if you've ever known you'd crossed a line you couldn't uncross. Command had tried to keep it quiet, but rumors spread faster than oil on a hangar floor. The compound's top brass were convening behind closed doors, deciding if she'd face suspension, charges, anything to get her off the flight line. A mechanic flying rescue after being grounded? It rattled their hierarchy. And men like Lyndall weren't about to let that go. She found him waiting by the mess hall, arms folded tight across his chest, smirk loaded like a round in the chamber. "You should pack up your locker, Hayes. Chain of command's clear. You're done." She didn't bother to stop. "I was done the minute I took that stick. So were you." He barked a laugh. "You think you're a hero? You think that gets you special treatment?" Kara spun on her heel, boots grinding into the wet gravel. "I think I'm the reason 5 of our people are alive tonight. And when the next ridge falls, I'll be the one you call again." She left him there, smirk gone, eyes narrowed like a wolf that just found the sheep bite backed out in the Valkyrie's maintenance bay. The hum of work brought her peace. Grease under her nails, the warm smell of coolant mixing with the cold bite of the night air. Her father had always said you could feel a machine's soul through your hands. Tonight, she felt the Valkyrie's bones singing with tension, an old friend straining at the leash. Tap. "If you know your tools better than you know most people." Captain Rourke found her there, sleeves rolled, goggles perched on her forehead like a mechanic from another century. He leaned against the landing gear, arms crossed. "They're going to bring you in tomorrow," he said quietly. A formal inquiry. Maybe worse. Kara didn't look up from the stabilizer bolts. "They can strip my badge. They can't ground my brain." Rourke's laugh was dry. "They can sure as hell lock you up." She tightened the last bolt with a hiss. "Not before I fix this bird. Not before we're ready." "Ready for what?" She looked him dead in the eye. "For when the fault line takes the whole damn canyon with it." The next tremor hit at dawn, less a quake, more a warning shot. Sirens wailed. The compound buzzed like an anthill kicked open. Kara was already at the command tent, before the brass even zipped up their jackets. "Landslide at Sector 14. She barked at the startled liaison. 2 convoys trapped. Heavy equipment won't clear it in time. And the weather's about to turn again." The commander's silver hair, silver stars, no silver spine glared at her. "You're not cleared to fly. You're not even cleared to stand here." She leaned across his map table, voice like steel on stone. "You want those people alive? Then you clear me. Or you pray to whatever you believe in that someone else can do what I do." Silence, except for the low rumble of the earth under their boots. Rourke backed her play. So did half the rescue crew who'd ridden out the last tremor on her skids. The Valkyrie was jury-rigged, parts cannibalized from 3 other craft. But she'd hold if Kara coaxed her just right. She clambered into the cockpit, helmet tucked under her arm. Rourke climbed into the co-pilot's seat again, a faint grin under his scowl. "You realize they'll court-martial both of us if we come back alive." Kara checked the fuel readout, flipped the stabilizer to neutral. Then we'd better make it worth the paperwork. The Valkyrie lifted into a bruised dawn sky. Rain slashed sideways across the canopy, runnels of water, tracing the outlines of stress fractures Kara had welded shut only hours ago. She could feel every rivet, every bolt, every breath the bird took under her palms. Below, the canyon was no longer just a gash in the earth, it was a maw widening by the hour. Entire chunks of ridge slid into darkness, taking trees, boulders, and any hope of a stable landing zone with them. They flew low, scanners pinging with topographical data that updated in real time. Kara's mind stitched the pieces together: safe approach vectors, weight limits, rotor clearance. A dance at the edge of physics. They spotted the convoys. 2 heavy trucks nose-deep in mud. Half a dozen responders waving frantically from them. Shattered road. A fresh crack snaked toward them, an invisible fuse ready to light the canyon's next collapse. Rourke hissed through his teeth. There's no place to hover. We're dead if we drop the ramp here. Kara keyed the comms. Get your people ready. When I say run, you run. The ground team's leader, a woman named Ortiz, came back through static. Run where? There's nowhere to. Kara cut her off. Run, toward me. Trust me. She brought the Valkyrie in hard and low, rear ramp skimming the mud. The bird shuddered, wind shear threatening to tip her nose first into the ravine. Kara feathered. The throttle, fighting the crosswinds like a matador dancing with a bull. Now! The responders sprinted, boots sinking in the muck. One stumbled, nearly dragged under by the sucking clay. Rourke unbuckled, lunged for the harness cable, clipped himself in, and leaned out the ramp to haul the kid up by the armpits. Drop a, if you know some risks are worth it. Mud splattered the deck as they scrambled aboard. The last one jumped, feet missing the ramp by inches. Kara swung the bird sideways, the downdraft kicking up a miniature hurricane. The crack in the earth raced past them, devouring the spot. They'd been a heartbeat before. The Valkyrie's lift fans coughed once. Twice. Kara's jaw clenched as she throttled to max. The bird lurched skyward, skids brushing the canyon rim. Rourke's shout cut through the roar. Stabilizer arms gone, she's gonna yaw. Kara slammed the manual override, sweat blinding her. She flew the machine by feel alone. Her father's lessons burned into muscle memory. Her mother's calm whisper reminding her to breathe. They cleared the ridge. The canyon behind them gave one last shudder, then collapsed into itself. An ocean of dust and stone. They limped back to Echo Wing in a battered, wheezing Valkyrie, trailing sparks like falling stars. Mechanics poured from the hangar, eyes wide, hands reaching for the airframe as Kara cut the engines. She stumbled out, knees weak but eyes blazing. The compound commander stood waiting, arms folded. You disobeyed a direct grounding order, he said, voice cold enough to freeze the rain. Kara stepped closer, boots squelching in the mud. And I saved your people, again. He stared at her for a long, terrible moment. Then he turned to the crowd that had gathered: pilots, mechanics, medics, wide-eyed and silent. This woman is no longer just a mechanic, he said. She's our best damn chance. Kara didn't smile. She didn't bow her head. She just looked at the trembling earth beyond the fences, knowing it was far from done with her yet. Stay tuned. Tomorrow, Kara finds out what happens when the next mission threatens not just her life, but the secret that's kept her hidden all these years. The compound buzzed like an angry hive. Kara Hayes felt its pulse under her boots, the thrum of generators, the hum of medics wheeling out stretchers, the barked orders from brass who'd spent the last 6 hours pretending her name wasn't. At the top of every report, she ducked into the Valkyrie's shadow, shoulder pressed to the cold metal skin. Rain dripped from her hair, mixing with the streaks of grease on her jaw. The rescue was done. The canyon's collapse had taken half the ridgeline, but none of the lives she'd fought for. And yet, the uneasy hush around her said she'd won. A battle, not the war. Drop of, if you've ever wondered what price of victory really costs. Inside the ops tent, Rourke leaned over a topographical feed. New tremors registered every 15 minutes, each one twisting the landscape like a live wire. He glanced at Kara, his eyes carrying that question he hadn't dared to ask yet. How much longer can you keep flying miracles on a broken machine? She gave him the same answer she'd given herself since the day she learned to stand on a rotor blade while the engine screamed beneath her. As long as it takes, but tonight, the silence that waited for her in her bunk was heavy. She sat cross-legged on the mattress, boots still on, palms braced on her knees. Her father's flight jacket lay across her thighs. The frayed name patch haze felt like a brand dot in the dark. The memories she'd sealed up for years seeped out like engine oil from a cracked block. She was 12 when she watched her father crash land a prototype skimmer on the edge of a training range. She'd felt the impact before she saw the smoke. Her heartbeat sensed to the distant thunder of metal tearing rock. They called it pilot error in the final report. But she knew it wasn't. She'd spent that night on her belly under the wreckage, tracing the torn hydraulic lines, fingers raw from the jagged edges, memorizing every failing that should have been caught in inspection. She never told her mother the full story. And she never told the compound the real reason. She learned every bolt and rivet of every aircraft she touched, because they'd buried the truth with her father's flight helmet, and she'd been digging it up ever since. A soft knock at her door pulled her back to now. Rourke stood there, rain dripping from his flight suit, eyes hollow with exhaustion. "You sleep?" he asked. Kara tilted her head. "You ever seen me sleep?" He almost smiled. Then he stepped inside and closed the door. "They're pulling the flight logs from every mission you've ever touched. Lyndall's calling it reckless endangerment. Says you've been masking system faults to push the birds further than spec." Kara snorted. "Masking faults? I've been fixing them so they don't kill us." Rourke leaned against the wall, arms folded. "He's digging for dirt, Kara, and he's good at it. You think he won't find something?" She met his eyes, her voice low. "He'll find out why I never let anyone else sign off on my birds. He'll find the discrepancies in my father's crash file, too. And when he does, he'll bury me before I bury him." Rourke's breath caught. "You kept that?" "I lived that," she said. "I never had a choice." Outside, the compound's lights flickered under the strain of the storm. Kara pulled her jacket tight, the fabric smelling of old leather and jet fuel. She felt the walls closing in protocol, suspicion. The ghosts of dead pilots who never got the truth they deserved. Tap. If you know secrets, don't stay buried forever. In 0300, when the compound finally fell into uneasy sleep, Kara slipped into the archives. Her boots made no sound on the cold tile floor. Rows of battered steel cabinets loomed like tombstones. She found the one she'd cracked open 100 times in her mind, but never dared to touch for real. Her father's file. Her old passcode. The log entries they'd redacted from every after-action report. She scanned line after line, tracing the altered flight logs, the handwritten notations in the margins that didn't match official statements. There it was. A defective stabilizer bolt, same part she'd flagged just last week on the Valkyrie. Same part that still sat in the supply bin, ordered but never installed. Because cutting corners saved money. And sometimes it cost lives. She felt the bile rise in her throat. She copied the file to her drive, slipped it into her boot, and closed the cabinet without a sound. At dawn, Lyndall blocked her path outside the hangar. He grinned like a snake that finally caught its tail. "Been busy, Hayes? Archives this time? You must think you're untouchable." She brushed past him, boots hitting the tarmac like hammer blows. "I don't think I'm untouchable. I think you're not ready for what's coming." His smirk faltered. "And what's that?" She turned, the morning wind whipping her hair across her eyes. "The truth." Hours later, the command briefing room was stifling. Kara stood alone at the end of the table, drive in hand. Brass lined the walls, cold eyes, sharp suits, polished boots that had never seen mud or machine oil. She slid the drive. Across the table. Everything you need to know about the crash that killed my father. And every part we've cut corners on since. A colonel leaned forward, voice dripping with disdain. You're gambling your career on conspiracy theories? One faulty bolt from 20 years ago. Kara met his gaze. That one bolt's been killing people for 20 years. I'm done letting it. Rourke sat at the far end, silent but present. She felt his eyes on her back like armor. Lyndall, standing near the door, cracked his knuckles. He'd hoped to watch her fall apart. But she felt steadier than she had. In years, when they dismissed her, she stepped outside into the cold dawn air. The compound was still. No applause, no cheering. Just the wind whistling across the canyon's raw scar. She rested her hand on the Valkyrie's nose, grease mixing. With rain. She'd flown her secret straight into the storm, and now she'd see if she could fly herself out. Stay tuned. Tomorrow, Kara discovers the cost of telling the truth and the mission that will test her legacy like never before. The compound woke before the sun. Word had spread faster than any official memo ever could. Kara Hayes, the mechanic who flew, had dropped the truth like a wrench on a glass floor. She'd cracked the system open from the inside, and now everyone wondered if it would swallow her whole. She pulled her father's jacket tight around her shoulders as she crossed the tarmac. Eyes followed her, some curious, some wary, all hungry for the fallout. Lyndall lurked at the edge of the hangar, arms folded, his grin all teeth and venom. Droppa, if you've ever felt eyes burn holes through your back. Inside the command tent, the air was stale with heated words and thinly veiled threats. Brass poured over her files, line by line, number by number. The defective stabilizer bolt, the one she'd flagged last week, the one her father had died because of, lay on the table like a smoking gun. A colonel pointed a gloved finger at her. You're out of line, Hayes. This was classified material. You're not authorized. She cut him off, voice level. I'm authorized to keep people alive, or did you forget that part? Silence. A thin crack in the command's armor. Rourke stood behind her, a pillar in a storm. He hadn't said much since the night she'd brought him the drive. But his presence spoke for him. The old guard was with her, whether the brass liked it or not. By noon, the briefing broke apart into whispers and side conversations. Kara stepped out into the sun, weak and watery through the haze of the ongoing landslides. The canyon beyond the fences still rumbled, an unsteady heartbeat she could feel in her bones. Rourke joined her by the Valkyrie's battered frame. You know what comes next, don't you? She looked up at him, the ghost of a smile tugging at her cracked lips. They'll want my badge, they'll want my silence, he nodded. But they won't get your skill. Or my name. She rested her palm against the warm metal hull, feeling the hum of the auxiliary generator they'd rigged just to keep her in the air. Her father had taught her that some machines had souls. The Valkyrie had hers now, stubborn, resilient. Impossible to ground. Tap, if you know a legacy isn't given, it's built, bolt by bolt. In the mess hall, the crew had fallen silent when she walked in. A few nodded. Some dropped their eyes. But one by one, the ones who'd flown under her rotor wash, who'd been lifted out of canyons that should have swallowed them whole, stood up. Ortiz, the team lead she'd hauled out in the mudslide, clapped her on the shoulder. Still just a mechanic? Kara managed a wry grin. Maybe more. The others laughed, tension easing like a jammed throttle finally slipping free. That night, the storm rolled back in black clouds swirling above the compound like smoke from a dying engine. Kara lay on her bunk, eyes open, listening to the code. Distant whine of rotor blades as other pilots ran drills in the dark. She knew the terrain was shifting faster now. She could almost see the canyon in her mind, new cracks, spider webbing under the rain. Boulders dancing on the edge of collapse. When the knock came at 0200, she wasn't surprised. Rourke stood in the hall, flight suit zipped up, boots laced tight. Emergency evac, South Ravine. Whole settlement perched on a shelf that's about to go. He hesitated. They want you to stay grounded. Kara swung her legs off the bunk. And you? He shrugged. I trust the only pilot who knows that ravine by feel. The flight line was chaos. Generators hummed, searchlights swept the compound. Crews strapped gear to the Valkyrie's belly like a pack mule bracing for one last climb. Lyndall tried to intercept her at the ramp. This is insane, Hayes. You'll crash that bird. And if you don't, I'll make sure they clip your wings when you land. She brushed past him without a word. He reached for her shoulder. Rourke stepped in, hand firm on Lyndall's chest. Touch her, and you'll be the one grounded. Kara climbed into the cockpit. The seat felt like home. Her father's voice whispered through the rain. Fly the machine, kid. The rest will follow. The Valkyrie lifted into blackness. The canyon waited below, invisible except for the flash of lightning outlining its jagged rim. Kara flew low and slow, the rotors slicing the downpour into ragged threads. She saw the settlement, a cluster of shacks and trailers clinging to the eroding ledge like teeth in rotten gums. Families huddled near makeshift landing markers, their faces pale blurs in the dark. Rourke leaned in, voice tight. One pass, Kara, you slip, we're part of the landslide. She throttled down, skids brushing the ledge. Rain lashed the canopy. The Valkyrie shuddered as if it knew it was pushing past its limits yet again. She worked the controls. Like a concert pianist, trim, throttle, pitch. Every movement measured to keep the bird from tipping backward into the ravine. Cargo hooks clanged against the skids as Rourke secured the evac harnesses. One by one, the families ran for the ramp. A mother shoved a bundled infant into Kara's arms as she leaned out of her seat. For a heartbeat, the cockpit lights caught. The baby's wide, unblinking eyes. Kara tucked the child into the co-pilot's lap. Buckle him in. Rourke's eyes widened, but he obeyed. The mother stumbled aboard behind him, sobs lost in the roar of the storm, a rumble below. The shelf gave a low groan, the sound of rock shearing under centuries of pressure. Now! Kara shouted. She throttled up, the Valkyrie's engines screaming. Mud sprayed the ramp as the skids tore free of the crumbling ledge. Behind them, the settlement slid into the abyss. A slow-motion collapse caught in the flicker of the lightning. Cleared the ridge with inches to spare. Back at the compound, the evacuees stumbled out into the floodlights. Kara stayed in her seat, helmet off, rain soaking her hair. She watched the baby in Rourke's arms blink at the sudden brightness, tiny fists batting at his chin. Rourke looked at her, eyes glassy. Your father would have been proud. Kara traced a finger over the Valkyrie's console. He'd have told me to check the stabilizers before I took off again. Rourke laughed hoarse, raw and real. Drop a, if you know sometimes legacy is a burden worth carrying. Hours later, back in the hangar, Kara found Lyndall waiting by her locker. He didn't smirk this time. He didn't say a word. He just stepped aside as she walked past, shoulders squared. She paused, just long enough to look him dead in the eyes. Everyone called me just a mechanic, she said. Remember that the next time you try to bury the truth. He didn't answer. She didn't wait. Kara climbed back into the Valkyrie's belly, running her hands over each repair, each weld. The earth still trembled underfoot. There would be another mission. There would always be another mission, but this time no one would ever question what she was capable of. Stay tuned. Tomorrow, the mission that tests her hardest choice yet, and the moment she risk everything for the lives she's sworn to lift from the edge. The dawn broke hard and cold over Echo Wing's battered landing strip. The Valkyrie loomed in the mist, its patched seams and burnished panels a testament to every rule Kara Hayes had bent and every life she'd saved. She leaned against the skid, helmet under her arm. Eyes locked on the horizon where the fault lines still bled dust into the sky. Droppa, if you've ever stood on the edge and known you'd step over it again. Inside the ops tent, Command argued over evacuation. Routes, resource allotments, and Kara's flight clearance like her name was a chess piece. She didn't bother listening anymore. Rourke did the arguing now, voice steady, shoulders squared, calling out every half measure and buried file they tried to float past him. She'd handed him the truth. He'd chosen to carry it alongside her. Outside, she ran her hand along the Ko. Valkyrie's belly, tracing the stress fractures sealed with composite resin, each weld like a scar. The machine felt different now, heavier with the ghosts she carried. But it would lift. She'd make sure it did. Tap, if you've ever loved something broken, because you knew how to fix it. The new tremors came like a heartbeat out of sync, sharp, irregular jolts that made fuel lines rattle and power relays flicker. In the maintenance bay, Kara listened to the whispers as she packed a spare hydraulic kit into her flight bag. Whole south sectors sliding into the canyon. They're sending her? She's not even. Who else would you trust to pull you out? The muttering fell away when she turned. She gave them nothing, no nod, no smile, no words to soothe the fear she saw in their eyes. They'd either follow her into the storm, or they wouldn't. She wasn't here to convince them. The orders dropped before lunch. Sector Delta, an entire mobile command unit pinned between two collapsing ridges 50 miles south. No clear LZ. No safe hover zone. No backup. Kara thumbed through the readout on her tablet. Mudflows, rockfall, seismic shears opening at random intervals like flying into the lungs of a dying giant. She felt her pulse steady instead of spike. This was what she was built for. What her father had taught her to see in the metal. What her mother had shown her to do when seconds made the difference between alive and gone. Rourke met her by the flight line. You good? She glanced at him, a half smile flickering. Define good. He shook his head, almost laughed. Right, just don't forget who you are up there. She locked her helmet into place. They called me just a mechanic. I'm about to show them what that means. The Valkyrie lifted into dirty gray skies, rain spitting from the bruised clouds like curses. Kara pushed the throttle forward, rotors slicing through crosswinds that wanted to toss her bird into the cliffs. She felt every shudder, every low groan of the airframe, as if her own ribs carried the strain. Below, the canyon spread out like a fresh wound, fractures racing outward, hungry for more. In her headset, the command unit's voice cracked through static. Hayes, you're not cleared. Yeah, she cut in. Let's skip the part where you tell me not to save your people. A stunned pause. Then, copy, we're triangulating your approach. Shelf's coming apart fast. You have maybe 5 minutes. The terrain shifted beneath her like a living thing. Kara threaded the Valkyrie between rock pillars that leaned overhead like the ribs of some colossal beast. Each updraft slapped the rotor blades. Each downdraft threatened to flip her bird into the chasm. She hovered above the command unit. Battered convoy half buried in mud. Figures scrambled on the shattered ledge, equipment cases half swallowed by the creeping landslide. Rourke, get the ramp prepped, she barked. He keyed the manual override. The tailgate yawed open, wind whipping inside, tearing at the straps that kept gear bolted to the deck. A rock slab split off the shelf, slamming into the valley below with a thunderous crack that shook the cockpit glass. Kara fought the controls, nose tipping forward dangerously. She overcorrected, engines screaming in protest. Through the HUD, she caught movement, 2 engineers dragging a wounded comms officer across the mud. She nudged the stick, dipping the skids just low enough that they could push the stretcher up the ramp. One slipped. Kara killed the forward drift, let the downdraft pin them in place. Rourke leaned out, harnessed in, grabbed the man's collar. One by one, they scrambled aboard. Another crack. The ledge shifted again, this time a whole vein of stone sliding. Loose, hold her, Kara. Rourke yelled. She grit her teeth, eyes locked on the horizon, mind racing through the compensator tolerances. The Valkyrie dipped, skids scraping mud. Droppa. If you've ever risked it all when every gauge screamed stop. She found the lift just in time, slammed the throttle forward. The nose pitched up, mud sheeting off the ramp like blood from an open wound. The convoy below vanished in a roar of sliding earth. They climbed through swirling dust, the engines coughing on grit. Kara scanned the readouts. One stabilizer near critical failure. Fuel burn triple nominal. Rourke stumbled into the cockpit, helmet tucked under his arm. That shelf gave way 2 seconds early. If you hadn't. She cut him off, voice like. Gravel, we still have 2 more extraction points. Get them ready. His eyes widened. You can't be serious. The stabilizers, she flicked a switch, rerouting power from non-essentials. I'll hold her together. They're waiting. For the next hour, Kara pushed the Valkyrie beyond design. Crosswinds howled. Lightning forked through the churning sky. Twice, she nearly lost lift, rotors clawing at air that felt more like liquid stone. Each survivor that staggered up the ramp was another bolt in her legacy, a testament to the woman they'd once called just a mechanic. By the time the final pickup was secured, the Valkyrie's frame was hot enough to blister paint. Warning lights painted the cockpit like a Christmas tree gone mad. Rourke's voice trembled. She won't hold, Kara. She'll break apart before we're clear. Kara felt the shudder in the seat, the strain in the stick. She whispered to the machine like she would to a wounded friend. Not yet. 1 more mile, 1 more breath. You've got this. She flew on memory, her father's lessons, her mother's calm, her own hands that knew every nut and bolt. They cleared the worst of the canyon, just as the final aftershock tore the shelf behind them into the abyss. Back on the tarmac, the Valkyrie wheezed and hissed like a dying dragon. Mechanics scrambled around her, eyes wide at the fresh cracks spidering through the struts. Kara climbed out, knees buckling under her. Rourke caught her elbow, but she shrugged him off, stepping away from the bird's battered frame. A young engineer, eyes wide, blurted out, "How did you keep her together?" Kara looked back at the Valkyrie, broken, but not beaten. She rested her hand on the skid, voice steady. "I didn't keep her together," she said. "She kept me together. Stay tuned. Tomorrow, Kara will have to decide whether to let go of the machine she made her name with, or sacrifice it all to lift one last mission from the edge of the abyss." The Valkyrie squatted in the hangar like an old warhorse, steel skin scorched from the storm and seams shivering with stress. Kara Hayes stood under its belly, arms folded across her chest, boots planted in the oil-slick shadows. Around her, the mechanics whispered, words like unsalvageable, structural fatigue, scrap. But they didn't dare say them too loud, not while she was there. Droppa, if you've ever refused to let go when everyone else said it was time. Rourke leaned against a tool locker, arms crossed, watching the crew pull off cracked panels and scorched wiring like a surgeon cutting open a patient with no pulse. "It's done, Kara." She flew her last. Kara shook her head, jaw tight. "You don't walk away from something that's carried you this far." Rourke's voice softened. "And when she tears herself apart in the air, you go with her. We all do." She ran a gloved hand across the Valkyrie's flank. "One more mission." He barked a humorless laugh. "You sound like your father." She didn't flinch. He knew when it was worth the risk. Tap, if you've ever trusted your gut more than the odds. The command tent smelled like stale coffee and fear. Lyndall paced the corner, arms flailing. As he ranted at the commander, "She's reckless insubordinate. She's pushing that bird beyond spec. She's going to kill herself and everyone with her." Kara stood behind him, hands clasped behind her back. "Maybe you should have done your job right the first time. Maybe then the Valkyrie wouldn't need me to keep her alive." The room fell silent. The commander sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. One last evac, North Sector. Families. Trapped at the Ridge Hospital. After that, no more. Kara held his gaze. I'll bring them home. She walked out before Lyndall could fire off another word. The Ridge Hospital perched on the canyon lip, like a child's block tower crumbling. At the edges, foundation eaten away by rain and shifting fault lines. In the ready room, Kara spread the seismic scans across the table, fingers tracing the spidery cracks that threatened to swallow the entire plateau. Rourke tapped the fuel estimate. You know we can't lift a full load. Not with the stabilizers. Fractured. Kara's eyes stayed on the maps. We won't land. We'll hover, bring them up by cable. Gear stays stowed. Lighter bird, less strain, he whistled low. No landing gear. That's the last line if everything else fails, she shrugged. Then we don't fail. Night fell thick and heavy as they spooled the Valkyrie's engines. Rain hissed through. The open hangar doors, the floodlights throwing long shadows on the battered fuselage. Kara strapped in, helmet visor down, eyes locked on the blinking dash. Rourke's voice came through the headset, dry as sandpaper. Say the word, we scrub. Kara didn't blink. Burn the landing gear. He laughed, raw and sharp. Hell of a last ride, Hayes. They lifted off into a maelstrom. Cross winds slammed the rotors. The bird lurched sideways, the cockpit rattling like a shaken can. Kara's hands moved by instinct, every adjustment. A prayer stitched into steel dot, the hospital came into view, floodlights flickering as the earth shivered beneath its foundations. Nurses waved chem sticks on the cracked roof, children clinging to stretchers wrapped in emergency blankets. Rourke peered down. Wind shears brutal. You lose lift, we spin out. Kara throttled down just enough to stabilize the hover. The Valkyrie shuddered but held. Winch down, she ordered. One by one, the patients rose from the crumbling rooftop, cradled by the cable, swaying like puppets in the gale. Nurses climbed next, eyes wide with disbelief as they tumbled onto the ramp. A tremor rocked the plateau. A chunk of roof vanished into the abyss. Kara's teeth rattled in her skull as she fought to hold position. Next load. Rourke's voice was hoarse. We're pushing max torque. Hold her. Drop a if you know when you're too far in to back out. The final stretchers came up just as the rooftop buckled. A mother screamed for her child. Kara saw a tiny figure frozen on the far edge. Eyes wide, arms out. She tapped the winch override. Swing me in. Kara. Too late. She unclipped her harness, boots hitting the skids. The wind roared. Around her, cold and alive with the canyon's hunger. She leapt the last 3 feet, landing hard on the crumbling ledge. Stones slid beneath her. She grabbed the child, wrapped him in her arms. Trust me, she whispered. He buried his face in her jacket. She turned, the ledge giving way. Rourke swung the Valkyrie sideways, rotors grazing the cliff wall. She flung herself forward, skids slammed her shoulder. She shoved the boy onto the ramp. Boots skidding on wet metal, Rourke hauled them in as the plateau cracked wide open. Engines howling, Kara yanked the stick. The Valkyrie bucked upward, the canyon lunging for them. Mud and debris slammed the tail. Rattling every bone in her body, Rourke's voice was a rasp. Stabilizers, she's splitting. Kara locked her arms, mind clear. Then she split in the sky, not here. They climbed through swirling dust, the world below swallowed by darkness and falling stone. They touched down on the compound's cracked pad at dawn. Mechanics and medics surged forward, pulling the last survivors out on stretchers. The Valkyrie hissed, steam venting from ruptured coolant lines. Kara stayed in the cockpit, helmet on her lap, fingers tracing the cracked dashboard. Rourke leaned in, eyes tired but burning bright. She won't fly again, he said softly. Kara nodded, blinking. Grit from her lashes. She wasn't meant to. She stepped down, boots hitting the tarmac one last time. She turned back, watching the bird that had carried her through the abyss. No landing gear left. she whispered. Just the next jump. Stay tuned. Tomorrow, the final fault line, when Kara must decide what she's willing to sacrifice, when even her name hangs in the balance. Kara Hayes had always known the ground could betray you. Her father taught her that in a thunderstorm over a rocky test range. Her mother taught her again at the side of an overturned medevac when the soil under the wheels turned to quicksand. But this time, the betrayal wasn't earth or weather, it was the men who'd sworn to keep her in the sky. If you've ever felt the floor drop out from under you. After the hospital rescue, the compound felt like a ghost town. The Valkyrie, her battered bird, her metal heart, sat in the hangar stripped to the frame, a skeleton in the shadows. Engineers tiptoed around it like mourners at a wake. Kara's name ricocheted in hushed voices. Hero, liability, legend, risk. She stayed away from the rumor mill. She had other storms to fly through now. Rourke found her in the maintenance bay, shoulder deep in a stripped stabilizer arm, eyes rimmed with sleepless fury. You know they're calling you in. Kara didn't. Look up. They'll try to ground me. What else is new? He leaned against the wall, boots scuffing oil stains into the concrete. This isn't grounding. It's a shutdown. Lyndall's got the brass by the throat. He's telling them you're a threat to protocol, to morale. He wants you out. She let the wrench slip from her fingers, metal clanging on the deck. If they'd done their damn jobs, I know, his voice softened. But they're scared, Kara. You break the rules, and you come back with lives saved. They hate that you make the impossible look routine. She cracked a bitter smile. There. Right, I do break the rules. Tap, if you've ever refused to play by someone else's blueprint. When they called her in, she wore her father's flight jacket like armor. The conference room reeked of burnt coffee and fear. Lyndall perched at the end of the table, a vulture in regulation blue. Lieutenant Hayes, the base commander said. Effective immediately, your flight status is revoked. Your credentials are suspended pending review. You'll remain confined to the compound. Kara stood so still. She felt the tremors beneath her boots more than the words. How many families? Did you pull from that canyon last week, sir? The commander flinched. Lyndall jumped in, his grin sharp. This isn't about heroics, it's about chain of command. You put everyone at risk. You've become a liability. She leaned forward, voice ablade. So did my father when he flagged a bolt they said was within spec. He was a liability. Too, until he wasn't. Lyndall slammed a file shut. You're finished. The world narrowed. Rourke was outside when she stormed out. He reached for her elbow. Kara, she jerked away. They'd rather bury people than fix the system. They'd rather silence me than admit I'm right. His eyes were tired. What are you going to do? Same thing I always do. She said, fly where they can't follow. The compound's fence line glowed with spotlights. Her boots splashed through last night's rain. She ducked behind the generator sheds, past the rows of grounded birds. The Valkyrie's shell waited in the hangar, but it couldn't lift her now. She needed something leaner, smaller, something they wouldn't expect her to touch, she found. It tucked behind the reserve hangar, a prototype scout drone with a seat built for test hops. Underpowered, under-armored, but with the right tweaks, it could cut through canyon winds like a knife. She flicked open the maintenance hatch, fingers flying. Reroute stabilizer power. Kill weight ballast. Override the flight lock. She could feel her father's hands in hers, her mother's calm in her chest. No fear, just the mechanical certainty of muscle memory. The night swallowed her as the scout's microrotors hummed to life. She guided it out onto the abandoned tarmac. The sky cracked open overhead, lightning flashes outlining the fractures beyond the ridge. The final fault line had ruptured. She'd seen it on the seismic feed. A whole sector about to sink. And no one else cleared to go in. She strapped in, no helmet this time, wind and rain slicing her cheeks raw. She lifted off low and dark. a ghost skimming treetops. They saw her on the sensors too late. Alarms blared across the compound. Searchlights swung wildly. Lyndall's voice barked orders over the comms, but Kara cut the feed. The scout drone was hers now, no chain of command, no protocol. Just her and the chasm yawning open beneath her. Drop a. If you've ever walked out knowing there was no way back. Below, the settlement lights flickered like fireflies about to drown. Kara banked the drone sideways, eyes locked on the ridge. The canyon rim was splitting mud flows, dragging structures inch by inch toward the abyss. No hover zone. No winch. Just her hands in the controls. She eased the scout to a hover, landing skids scraping asphalt. Families poured from a sagging community hall, children stumbling in the dark, dogs barking, elders carried in rough stretchers. Kara kicked the canopy open, waved them aboard the narrow side seats. The drone groaned, too much weight. She dumped fuel reserves to balance the lift. A boy climbed in last. Kara saw his eyes, wide and dark like hers had been when she watched her father walk into a cockpit for the last time. Hold on, she whispered. The ground shuddered, splitting under the drone's skids. Kara throttled up rotors, clawed for lift as the rim gave way. For a heartbeat, they dropped with the earth, then the lift caught, engines howling. The drone lurched skyward, trailing sparks. She skimmed treetops, nose pitched forward, fuel gauge screaming empty. Over her shoulder, the last of the settlement slid into the canyon with a roar that rattled the sky. She pushed the drone past redline. Rivets popped, stabilizers shrieked, wind tore at the open canopy. Kara flew by feel alone, her father's voice in every stick shift, her mother's calm in the steady pace of her breath. The compound loomed ahead, floodlights spearing the storm. She lined up for a dead-stick landing, no fuel, no gear, no time to pray. The drone hit the tarmac, hard skids snapping, belly scraping sparks down the strip. The cabin bucked. Survivors screamed, held tight. And then it was over, dead still. Rain hissing on scorched metal. Kara unbuckled, shoulders burning. She looked at the faces around her, dirty, trembling, alive. Rourke sprinted from the gates, eyes wide, grin breaking through the grime. "You're insane," he panted. She laughed, cracked. "And raw." "Yeah, and not just a mechanic." Behind her, Lyndall stared through the rain, face pale. Power stripped by a single truth. The ground breaks for everyone. It's what you lift from it that lasts. Stay tuned. Tomorrow, Kara faces the fallout. One last mission, one final decision. Who she is, and what she's willing to become when the world calls her name. Dawn over Echo Wing came on slow, a bruised smear of pink and gray across the horizon. Kara Hayes sat cross-legged on the cracked tarmac, beside the wrecked scout drone, her final defiance cooling under the morning rain. Sparks popped from the torn engine casing, steam hissed where the fuel line had kissed open air. Around her, the compound's brass hovered like vultures picking a carcass clean. Drop a, if you've ever known they were coming for you, even when you knew you were. Right, Rourke knelt by her shoulder, voice low. They want you in the briefing tent, right now. Official inquiry, official everything. Kara didn't stand. She traced a finger through the mud near her boot. They want a scapegoat. Someone to hang it all on before they sign off the next bolt that kills the next pilot. He rested a hand on her back, a weight that steadied. So you show up, you speak. You show them you're more than a ghost in their machine. She looked at him, rain dripping from the ends of her hair. I've shown them. They just didn't want to see it. Inside the tent, the air was stale with burnt coffee and stale threats. Lyndall leaned on the end of the long folding table, smirk sharp as a scalpel. "Lieutenant Hayes, you want to explain yourself?" Kara dropped her father's flight jacket on the table. The thud made the cups rattle. "That drone didn't crash. Because I broke it. It landed because I kept it together. Just like the Valkyrie. Just like every bird you tried to ground me from. The commander cleared his throat. You violated flight lockdown. You endangered civilians. Kara leaned forward, voice low and cutting. I lifted 30 people out of that fault line. While you were down here filing papers, a younger officer piped up nervously. We're grateful for that. But there are protocols. She barked a bitter laugh. Protocols didn't hold that canyon together. I did. Tap, if you've ever stood your ground when everyone else wanted you gone. Lyndall slammed a report on the table. The official recommendation is discharge. Dishonorable. You'll never fly again. You'll never hold clearance on any strip, any pad, any project in this country. Silence settled over the tent. Even Rourke, arms crossed in the back, went still. Kara just tilted her head, studying Lyndall like she'd study a cracked bulkhead. You think you've won, huh? She asked. He sneered. I'll have you escorted off base by noon. She straightened. By all means. Do it yourself. For a moment, he actually flinched. The door flap burst open. Ortiz, the ground team lead Kara had hauled out in the mudslide, marched in still wearing the same muddy boots. Behind her, a half-dozen medics, pilots, and engineers' faces. Kara knew, people whose lives she'd bought back from the canyon's edge. Ortiz's voice cut through the hush like rotor wash. You discharge her, we walk. The commander blanched. You what? Rourke stepped forward, grin like thunder. You heard her. You lose Hayes, you lose us. Who's gonna keep your birds in the air then? Lyndall's face twisted. This is insubordination. Kara's laugh was ragged but real. So charge them all. Hell, lock up the whole crew. See who you've got left to fly the next evac. The tent buzzed with whispers, but the commander only sighed, defeated by the truth she'd forced into daylight. You've made your point. Lieutenant, official reprimand. Suspension pending review. But you keep your clearance, for now. She grabbed her jacket from the table, slung it over her shoulder. Good, because you're gonna need me again. The fault line's still hungry. Outside, the rain let up. The canyon stretched on forever, scars deepening by the hour. Kara stood with her crew at the edge of the strip. Ortiz clapped her on the shoulder. Rourke handed her a battered cup of coffee. You know they'll come for you again. Rourke said. She sipped, grimaced. They can stand in line. That night, she sat in the shell of the Valkyrie. Tools spread around her like prayer beads. She ran her hands along the torn bulkheads, the stress lines where metal had nearly given way. She whispered thanks to every bolt that hadn't, every piece that had done its job when nothing else did. Drop A, if you've ever thanked something. Broken for holding just a little longer, Rourke's voice drifted in from the hangar door. Got word from South Sector. New tremor. Rescue teams pinned on the old highway. Kara didn't look up. How bad? She picked up a spanner, braced it against a twisted bracket. Can she fly again? Rourke walked in, knelt beside her. Not the Valkyrie, not as she is, but there's a frame in storage. Heavy lift. Never finished because no one could get the stabilizers to sync. Kara's eyes flicked to him, gleaming. In the hangar's dim light. Maybe they didn't know the right wrench to trust. He grinned. So what do we call her? She tapped the hull, grease smearing across her palm. Call her whatever you want. Just make her fly. Stay tuned. Tomorrow, Kara stakes her last flight on an unfinished prototype and discovers what? She's willing to lose when the storm comes for her name one final time. The prototype heavy lift sat like a myth in the dark end of Echo. Wing storage hangar half buried under tarps and spare landing skids. Dust crusted thick over its composite frame. Kara Hayes stood in its shadow, flight jacket draped over. Her shoulders, palms braced against the cold metal that would have to carry more than its share. Drop a, if you've ever stared at a mess and whispered, I can fix this. Rourke clicked on a battery lamp, sweeping the light across the skeletal. Airframe. They never finished the control sync. 2 test pilots said she yawed too wide on hover. Third one didn't bother strapping in. Kara circled the nose cone, eyes squinting at the half-wired stabilizer struts. She's not the Valkyrie. She doesn't have to be pretty. She just has to lift. Ortiz arrived, rolling up her sleeves. They'll court-martial you for this. You know that, right? Kara snorted. They'll have to catch me first. Tap, if you know that sometimes all you need is the right hands and no permission. They worked through the night. Old mechanics from her ground crew filtered in one, lugging an ancient torque meter, another wheeling in stripped-down servos from a wrecked drone. The hangar floor hummed with the quiet conspiracy of people who'd seen her pull miracles from fractured metal before at dawn. The prototype looked more like a war machine than a rescue craft rotors armored with patchwork plates, landing skids. Reinforced with scavenged composite struts, the cockpit glass scrubbed clean of dust. Kara climbed inside, fingers brushing the untested flight stick. It felt different than the Valkyrie, heavier, rawer, but honest. Rourke's head appeared in the hatch. You've got a flight crew lining up. You want me to fly right seat? She adjusted the headset, eyes on the half-lit runway outside. Not this time. You keep the comms clear. If she bucks me, you'll know. He hesitated, then cracked. A crooked grin. One day you're gonna stay on the ground, Hayes. Kara keyed the startup sequence. Not today. The engines coughed awake rusty throats, clearing decades of disuse. The hangar doors groaned wide. Rain battered the tarmac beyond, turning the strip into a mirror of flickering floodlights. The compound's alarms shrieked to life. Lindell's voice, thin and distant, cut across the open frequency. Hayes, shut her down. You do not have clearance for lift. Kara flicked her comm to local only. Neither did the canyon. She throttled up. The prototype shivered, struts flexing under the sudden torque. She leaned forward, eyes narrowed at the runway's end. Wind clawed the nose sideways. She feathered the tail rotor, compensating by instinct. Her father's words, her mother's calm threads stitched into every motion. Drop of, if you know that sometimes there is no plan B. The ground fell away. The compound blurred beneath her searchlights, chasing, but never catching. She banked south toward the old highway gorge, sensors flickering with red fault lines and heat signatures of trapped convoys. Down there, a mudslide had pinned a supply train between twin fractures. Survivors huddled in the shattered cars, diesel fires belching black plumes that smudged the canyon rim. Kara's HUD flickered. The stabilizer sync wailed warnings, yaw drift creeping past safe margins. She muttered under her breath, hands dancing across manual overrides. One bolt at a time. One breath at a time. She brought the prototype to a hover 50 feet above the wreck. Rain lashed the rotor blades. Below, responders signaled with chem lights, green for casualties, red for ammo crates they'd have to abandon. Kara keyed the rear ramp, voice steady. Ortiz, winch them 2 at a time. Don't overload the bay. If she yaws, you'll be swinging like laundry in a hurricane. Ortiz's voice came back. Copy, just keep her steady. Easier said than done. Each new load shifted the craft's balance. The prototype yawed left, right, nose dipping toward the gorge floor. Kara gripped the stick so tight her knuckles blanched. She heard the ghosts of every failed test pilot in the creaks and groans around her. You're not them, she whispered. You're mine now. The last survivors scrambled up the winch line. The gorge cracked again, a shelf giving way under the weight of soaked rock. The prototype lurched sideways. Stabilizer alarms screamed. Kara throttled hard, eyes on the HUD. Yaw drift climbed. The ground lunged up. She overrode the limiters. The cockpit lights flared. The machine bucked, then found lift. Metal whined like a live thing fighting itself. Rourke's voice cut in over comms. You've got stress fractures on starboard. Get her out. Kara bared her teeth in a grin the storm couldn't wash away. Not done yet. She pitched the nose forward, engines shrieking as they clawed for altitude. Below, the gorge collapsed, an entire train swallowed in seconds. They hit the ridgeline in ragged formation, Ortiz shouting head counts, medics bracing casualties as the prototype rocked on failing hydraulics. Kara eased the bird down onto a half-cleared lot outside the compound gates. Skids slammed into mud and fractured concrete, sparks hissing through the downpour. For a moment, no one moved. Then cheers cut the storm's howl. Hands hauled stretchers. Down the ramp. Families stumbled free, boots slipping on slick gravel. Kara stayed strapped in, chest heaving, hands still locked on the stick. Rourke leaned in through the cockpit hatch, his grin pure disbelief. "You brought her home." Kara peeled off her headset, hair plastered to her forehead. "She brought Emmy home. Drop 'em if you've ever given everything you had to hold something together one more time." Lyndall stood near the fence line, pale and speechless. Kara caught his eye as she stepped out into the rain. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Ortiz found her first, clapping her on the back so hard she stumbled. "One more canyon, huh?" Kara barked a laugh, raw and hoarse. "One more, maybe." She turned, staring at the battered prototype as the engines cooled. The rain pooled in the gouges along the nose, seeping into every scar the flight had carved. It didn't matter. It had flown. It had lifted. It had done what no one else would clear. Stay tuned. Tomorrow, Kara faces her final choice. Keep flying broken birds until she breaks. Herself, or trust what she's built to those who once called her just a mechanic. The prototype's battered silhouette glowed under dawn's first cut of light, steam rising off its rain-slicked fuselage like a warhorse catching its breath. Kara Hayes stood by the open ramp, boots planted in the mud that had swallowed so many stories these past days. Her hands shook not from fear, but from the memory of every fault line she'd flown over, every seam she'd kept from splitting just long enough to pull someone free. Drop a, if you've ever wondered what they'd call you when you're gone. Rourke leaned beside her, shoulders slumped against the wheel strut. "You know you can't keep doing this, right? Flying birds they want scrapped, patching bolts that should be replaced in factories, outrunning storms no sane pilot would touch." Kara shrugged, voice low. "Someone has to." He tipped his head toward the compound gates. "They're talking about giving you a commission. Full pilot's badge, command over a training wing. You could rebuild this place the right way, Kara. You don't have to be the last one off the cliff every time." She looked at him then, rain dripping from her hair. "They'll never stop calling me just a mechanic. Not really." His grin was soft, tired. "Yeah, and they'll keep surviving because of it." Inside the battered briefing tent, the air crackled with rumors, some cursing her name, some clinging to it like a lifeline. Lyndall stood by the door, arms crossed, eyes hollow. He didn't smirk now, didn't bark threats. Just watched her pass like a ghost he could no longer bury. At the head of the table, the base commander's voice was rough as old gravel. "Lieutenant Hayes, you've disobeyed more direct orders than some men get medals for. You've flown hardware we wrote off a decade ago. You've made enemies out of half this chain of command." Kara stayed silent. The ghosts of rotor blades whirred in her mind. All the broken machines that had trusted her hands more than any spec sheet ever could. The commander's eyes softened. "Just a hair. You've also brought home every soul we would have lost without you. That's a debt this compound will spend years paying back." He tapped a folder. "Commission is yours. Instructor rank. Your own birds, your own crew, if you want it." Tap. "If you've ever been offered the thing you fought for only to wonder if you want it now." Ortiz stood behind her, arms folded. Rourke nodded once. Kara stared at the paper, thumb brushing the corner. She thought of her father's crash file, the bolt that killed him because no one wanted to admit they'd been wrong. She thought of her mother's quiet hands, stitching wounds in the back of a rumbling transport, while the world fell apart outside. She thought of the Valkyrie's cockpit, of the shudder in the stick, when she pulled it through storms that would have eaten lesser pilots alive. Her breath shook as she lifted her eyes. "I'll sign it, but on one condition." The commander blinked. "Name it." "You stop calling me just a mechanic," she said, voice flat as the canyon floor. "When these kids break a bolt, when a stabilizer fails, when they're one gust from oblivion, I want them to know they don't survive because of a patch job. They survive because someone understands every seam. They survive because the woman flying them up there turned her wrench before she touched the throttle." The tent went quiet. Then Ortiz's low chuckle rolled out like thunder. "Amen to that. Droppa, if you know some things are worth saying out loud." That night, Kara walked the tarmac alone. The prototype lay silent in the shadows, fuselage weeping steam in the moonlight. She rested her palm on the hull, felt the warmth seep through her skin. Not goodbye. Just thank you. She traced the outline of the old call sign someone had stenciled on the side before the last run. Has folly. She grinned, teeth bared to the wind. Maybe, or maybe they'll just call it proof. In the dawn, recruits lined up by the hangar. Young faces, old eyes, flight suits baggy around shoulders, still learning the weight they'd carry. Kara walked past them, helmet under her arm, boots slapping puddles into the roar of distant aftershocks. She stopped at the fresh frame waiting under floodlights, another heavy lift. This one with clean bolts, new seals, stabilizers built from her specs. She'd fly it only to show them how to listen for the warning hiss, the subtle creak that said you were pushing a bird to her edge. And how to fly her back. Rourke's voice cracked on the coms, warm with something like pride. "Training flights cleared at your word, Hayes." She strapped in, visor down. "Copy. Let's lift them before the ground remembers to swallow them." Again, she pushed the throttle forward. The world fell away beneath her, not like an enemy anymore, but like an old wound that finally knew how to hold its scar. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.